Yes.
The Buffalo History Museum, and it is my honor to welcome you all today. We acknowledge that the Haudenosaunee Confederacy are the original stewards of the land which this museum stands upon, including the Seneca Nation, the keepers of the Western Door. Their care for this place extends far behind or beyond the 250 years of history that we are commemorating as a nation this year. As we mark the United States Semiquincentennial, which it's taken me a long time to practice that word, we do so with the understanding that this story did not begin only in 1776, and it does not end here either. It is a layered, ongoing, and it's shaped by many voices, some long-centered and many often historically excluded. On behalf of the Buffalo History Museum, we thank you for being here for public service at 250, New York's legacy of civic leadership. We are proud to partner with the Office of the New York State Inspector General and are grateful to Inspector General Lucy Lang for convening this conversation. Thank you. Give that a round of applause for that. New York's role in shaping public service is not only historical, it is ongoing. The standards of integrity, accountability, and responsibility are sustained, tested, and redefined every day through the work of public servants. Buffalo has been part of that story, sometimes at the center and sometimes at its edges, but always contributing to how public life is practiced and understood. At the Buffalo History Museum, we are approaching the 250th, the Semiquincentennial, as an opportunity to look at those layers of history, what endures, what has changed, and what still demands our attention. I hope while you're here today to take time to go downstairs and explore our Glamerica 250, History Never Goes Out of Style exhibit. It's our signature exhibition for this moment, and it considers how American identity has been expressed, contested, and reimagined over time. As a couple matters of housekeeping, there are restrooms on this floor right outside if you need those during the program. And again, I thank you for joining us this afternoon and being part of this very important conversation and learning. And it's now my pleasure to welcome up Rich Pizek, who is the chair of the Erie County Historical Commission and the America 250 on the America 250 Commission for our state. Please welcome Rich Pizek.
Thank you, Melissa. Melissa and I have been practicing semi-quincentennial since 2022, and it's still tough. It's still tough to do it. We have meetings all the time about it. So I just like to say America 250 or New York State 250. So much easier to say and relate to. So I'm a teacher in Buffalo Public Schools. I've been doing education work for many years. I see a lot of my friends and former colleagues here in the audience, which is great to see that. So America 250 is the nationwide celebration of the 250th anniversary of the United States for this year. So it holds a profound significance in New York State as both a historic powerhouse and in its role in the American Revolution. It's a vibrant modern hub for commemoration of New York. It was played out in this revolutionary era from 1773 to 1783. Last week, I was in New York City for the 4th of July and seeing the commerce, the history, seeing it all in full effect. I saw your Instagram. I saw the IG on IG with the touring the tall ships. Jack told me you're doing that. And then I said, this is such a great opportunity to see these types of things. So as educators, we have to make a conscious effort to educate kids for the next 250 years. And we're doing that. We're doing it with programs like the American History Beat, Kids Voting, National History Day, all project-based learning where the students take front and center of their education. They are empowered in their education. And that is what really, as an educator for many years, kids who are empowered, who are engaged, those are the ones that do the best. And it's not always kids, it's always the kids that have a passion for something. So over the past 250 years, we've become a nation of many nationalities, races, creeds, bound together by unity of patriotism. Freedom, equity, equality. The true patriotism springs from a belief in the dignity of the individual, the freedom and equality, not only for Americans, but or New Yorkers, but for all people on this earth. I want to thank you for your time. And we're going to have a cool video that our friends at the State 250, the Parks Department, New York State Parks, and the OIG's office worked on. And it is related to a person who many of you who live around here, you know, as Steuben County was named after. But if you look at the video and you look through history, it's actually Baron von Steuben. But the same person, same thing. But it's great to see that local connection have a national and lasting impact. So we have the video. Thanks, Jack.
I'm the Acting Commissioner of the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation.
And I'm Lucy Lang, New York State Inspector General.
Here to celebrate the life of Baron Friedrich von Steuben, the first Inspector General of the Continental Army during the American Revolution. Nestled near Remsen in Oneida County, Steuben Memorial State Historic Site preserves the home and final resting place of Baron Friedrich von Steuben. Our agency is proud to steward this historic landmark where visitors can experience firsthand a legacy of leadership, discipline, and service that shaped our young nation.
In 1778, The Continental Army was exhausted, disorganized, and uncertain of its future. Steuben arrived from Prussia, where he had trained under Frederick the Great, one of history's most exacting military leaders, and he joined General George Washington's then ragtag army. Under the training and guidance of Steuben, the Continental Army became coordinated, disciplined, and resilient, contributing to victories that helped lead to American independence. Steuben codified his strict rules in the Blue Book, forming the foundation of the rules that are still used by the American military today.
After the war, New York State became Steuben's adopted home. The state granted him 16,000 acres in recognition of his service. He built a modest log cabin, and though he planned a larger home and formal gardens, he died in 1794 before those plans were realized. In 1804, the land was preserved as a sacred grove, and in 1931, the Steuben Memorial State Historic Site was established, which today is managed through a partnership between New York State Parks and the National Park Service. Visitors can come and walk the land where von Steuben lived, worked, and was laid to rest.
Steuben's legacy of oversight extends well beyond the military, with hundreds of inspectors general now serving at the federal, state, and local levels. More than 2 centuries after Steuben left his mark on New York and the nation, New York created our own Office of the Inspector General to combat fraud and corruption. For decades now, the offices of the New York State Inspector General have exercised rigorous and independent oversight of state government.
Committed to preserving the legacy of good government, our Collections Care Center teams conserve and interpret objects related to Steuben's life and work. New York State Parks is honored to be the steward of a first edition copy of the Blue Book, von Steuben's pocket watch, and the uniform of William Norris, his aide-de-camp and successor as Inspector General.
In remembering Baron von Steuben, we recognize New York's long history of independent government oversight, a legacy that continues to guide the work of public servants today, committed to a government that operates with integrity.
New York has more than 250 parks and historic sites to explore our shared history, including 44 sites directly related to the American Revolution. Join us in commemorating America's 250th anniversary.
And happy 40th anniversary, Offices of the New York State Inspector General.
Thank you to the Buffalo Museum and our partners at State Parks and the New York State 250th Commemoration Commission. Good afternoon, esteemed panelists, guests, and colleagues, and the many folks who are watching us via live stream. It's a privilege to welcome you to Public Service at 250, New York's legacy of civic leadership. We're gathered in Buffalo to celebrate and reflect on New York's remarkable and ongoing contribution to the story of American public service. At the offices of the Inspector General, our mission is to foster confidence in New York State government by promoting integrity and transparency through oversight of covered agencies, their employees, and those doing business with the state. And it's the integrity of public servants that will be the focus of our conversation today. Before we begin our panel, I have 2 important and relevant pieces of IG business exemplifying service in action. And first, I am thrilled to invite the newest peace officer in our office to join me here so I can administer the oath of office. Chuck? You would raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Charles Dittmer,
I, Charles Dittmer,
do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear
to support the Constitution of the United States
to support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York.
and the Constitution of the State of New York.
I will faithfully discharge the duties
I will faithfully discharge the duties
of the Office of Investigator
of the Office of Investigator
at the offices of the New York State Inspector General
at the offices of the New York State Inspector General
as a peace officer
as a peace officer
to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability,
upholding the values of the offices of the Inspector General
upholding the values of the offices of the Inspector General,
and ensuring all laws are applied equitably.
and ensuring all laws are applied equitably.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
I am going to ask Charles to stay, and I invite Tony Provenzano to join us while I present
appointment certificates to the following offices of the Inspector General staff who have received appointments or promotions in recent weeks. These will be awarded to John Adamo, who's been promoted to Senior Investigative Auditor, Charles Dittmer, who you just met, who has been hired as an investigator, Joseph McDonnell, hired as an investigator, Eva Moskowitz, hired as investigative counsel, Robert L. Payne III, who has been promoted to Deputy Director of Digital Forensics. And I am pleased in person to share with you, in the state of New York, be it known that I, Lucy Lang, Inspector General of the state of New York, pursuant to the authority vested in me under the executive law of the state of New York, and reposing special trust and confidence in the abilities, integrity, diligence, and discretion of Anthony M. Provenzano Jr., do by these presents hereby appoint him Senior Digital Forensics Investigator in the offices of the Inspector General of our state, and do hereby authorize him to execute and fulfill the duties of that office according to the Constitution and laws of the state of New York, and to serve at my pleasure with all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities legally appertaining unto said office. In testimony whereof, I have caused these letters to be made patent and the seal of the state of New York to be hereunto affixed, done in the city of Albany on the 18th day of June, 2026. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, students of American history will be familiar with the phrase, "to the victor go the spoils." This was used to refer to the prevailing model of public service in the United States prior to the Civil War, the patronage system, in which the party of whomever won an election would staff the government with their loyalists. The phrase itself actually arose in defense of President Andrew Jackson's practice of rewarding political supporters with federal government jobs. And it was perhaps nowhere more intractable than in Albany and in New York City's Tammany Hall. Despite its prevalence, there was bitter opposition to the spoils system in the 1800s, and calls to reform the system rely instead on merit. And indeed, this conflict was actually at the very top of the legislative agenda in the country in the late 1870s. We'll talk about the reforms that came to pass that have given us our modern civil service system. But first, I'd like to introduce our panelists, who are truly experts across New York's civic life. Together, they draw on decades of dedicated service. I am pleased to introduce and invite to the stage Frida Foster. Frida D. Foster is chair of the New York State Workers' Compensation Board and a member of Governor Kathy Hochul's executive cabinet. Board member since 2009 and vice chair from 2016 to 2025. She has dedicated much of her career to public service and brings decades of experience in government, education, civic engagement, and public relations. During her time at the board, Chair Foster has reviewed tens of thousands of workers' compensation appeals, supported efforts to modernize the agency's systems and processes, helped implement New York State paid family leave. Before joining the board, she worked in public relations and led major civic education initiatives, including New York City's transition to electronic voting machines and the state's celebration of the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. She has served in leadership roles across CUNY, New York City government, and many civic organizations. She is a lifelong Harlem resident and currently serves as chair of the Harlem Community Development Corporation and the CUNY School of Public Health Advisory Board. Welcome, Chair Foster. Also joined by Commissioner Denise Miranda, who has served as the Commissioner for the New York State Division of Human Rights since 2024. For nearly 30 years, Commissioner Miranda has been actively engaged in the practice of law, protecting the rights of New Yorkers. Prior to joining the Division of Human Rights, Commissioner Miranda served as the Executive Director of the New York State Judicial Center for the Protection of People with Special Needs for 7 years. Before her career in state service, the Commissioner stood up for New Yorkers as Managing Director of the Urban Justice Center's Safety Net Project in New York City and as a prosecutor for domestic violence, child abuse, and sex crimes in the Bronx. Commissioner Miranda is deeply committed to community service. She is the co-chair of the New York State Bar Association's Committee on Civil Rights and a member of the Puerto Rican Bar Association, 100 Hispanic Women of Westchester, Women Creating Change, Westchester Black Women's Political Caucus, and the Latina Mentoring Initiative. She is a legislatively appointed member of Westchester County Hispanic Advisory Board and a 2026 Hispanas Organized Political Equality Binational Fellow. The commissioner was listed by city and state on the 2026 Protecting New York list, the 2025 Bronx Power 100 list, and the 2024 Power of Diversity Latino 100 list. She has been honored by El Diario as a distinguished Latina and by 100 Hispanic Women National with the Latina Government Service Award. She is a proud alumna of St. John's University School of Law, where she earned her Juris Doctor, and New York University, where she completed her Bachelor of Arts. President Robert J. Rodriguez, who since 2024 has served as President and Chief Executive Officer of the Dormitory Authority of the State of New York, one of the largest public finance and construction authorities in the country, leading the delivery of billions of dollars in projects that build and strengthen communities across New York State. In this role, he leads an organization that manages approximately $13 billion in active construction projects and issues roughly $10 billion in bonds annually to support hospitals, higher education institutions, nonprofit organizations, and other critical infrastructure statewide. Under his leadership, DAS role in administering major capital grant programs on behalf of New York State deliver transformative investments directly into our communities. President Rodriguez brings a unique combination of financial expertise and public service to this work. Prior to leading DASNY, he served as New York's 67th Secretary of State, and he represented East Harlem in the New York State Assembly for over a decade, where he advanced economic development, supported local governments, and worked to strengthen communities across New York. A lifelong New Yorker, he was born and raised in East Harlem as the grandson of Puerto Rican immigrants, an experience that continues to shape his commitment to expanding opportunity and delivering for communities across the state. Join me in welcoming our panelists. So before we delve into the historic underpinnings of New York State government, will each of you very briefly outline what when your agency was founded, its core mission, what the portfolio includes, and the general location and number of public servants who serve in your organization?
First, I want to say thank you so much for the invite for this important conversation and for the opportunity to hang out with my colleagues in government. The New York State Workers' Compensation Board was born actually July 1st, 1914. We just turned 112 years old. And our mission is very simple. It is to protect the rights of employers and employees by ensuring the proper delivery of benefits and promoting compliance with the law. Simply put, what that means is if you experience a workplace injury, you're entitled to not lose your job, right? You're entitled for that employer to help you to figure that out, to either have your medical or to have your lost wages compensated. And believe it or not, that didn't always used to happen. It used to be a very complicated system. I won't go into the details.
Oh yeah, it's very simple now, right?
It's very simple now, though, right? But that is the ongoing. That's the evolution. That's the ongoing commitment that my agency and I think all agencies have, is to make sure that we leave government better than we found it. So. Yes, and we have about 16 locations around the state and a little more than 1,000, like say 1,050 staff members, including about 108 judges that preside over these hearings that occur. And we have about 900 other committed public servants who do the rest of the work, and the rest of the work is quite large. So, and I'm proud to my job is to spread the good news, so that's our agency.
Commissioner?
So I thought I was going to have the big legacy of 81 years, but you win. So Division of Human Rights, we are the civil rights enforcement agency for the state of New York, and very proud to share with all of you that is a very rich legacy, because New York State was the first state in the nation to actually enact a civil rights law. So we think about New York and the history and the progressive values that we share. It's something I'm extremely proud to lead this agency at this point. I have been the commissioner there for 2.5 years, and we have a staff of approximately 300 individuals. We have offices everywhere from Buffalo to the Bronx, Syracuse to Hauppauge, and very proud of the work that they do every single day. We investigate all incidents of discrimination. We will adjudicate those. We will do hearings, and we are fact finder. What I will say is that there are many areas of jurisdiction. I know that'll be part of our conversation a little bit later, but our job basically is to ensure that everyone in New York is treated with dignity and respect, and that they are afforded all the opportunities that New York has available to them. And so I'm very proud to lead that mission at the division.
Excellent. Again, thank you for having us and really having a very robust conversation about government and service, 250 years worth of it. I lead the Dormitory Authority of the State of New York, also known as DASNY, and we were created in 1944 to help finance higher education infrastructure, in particular, helping to build and finance the dorms that that housed many of the soldiers who were coming back from World War II for post-GI Bill educations. And today, we are much more than just dorms. DASNY is one of the nation's largest public finance and construction authorities. We finance and build hospitals, colleges and universities, laboratories, mental health facilities, housing, community recreation facilities, and other public infrastructure. We have almost 500 dedicated public servants across New York State, in New York City, Albany, Rochester, and Buffalo, plus dozens of on-site offices, usually at locations where SUNY or CUNY currently operate. Our mission is ultimately about improving people's lives by delivering the infrastructure where public service happens. So we're proud of that role and giving many of you an opportunity to receive service in world-class institutions.
Before we go way back in history, let's go back to your personal history, maybe starting with you, President Rodriguez. What is it about your early life, family, or education that brought you into public service to begin with?
Happy to take the question. As you mentioned on the top of the order, I've had at least 3 significant jobs in public service, as well as a career in the private sector. And for me, it's being born and raised in East Harlem, second generation. My grandparents came over from Puerto Rico. And I think one of the themes as we talk about the transformation and attraction to public service and civil service, you'll recognize that immigration thread is certainly really important about that and committing the roots to help make your community better. That started with my grandfather, who was a bodega owner and contributing to his community's growth in one way, and certainly continued to my parents, who were civil servants and then eventually an elected official. And I swore I would never do that. I would never do that because it's so hard, and you recognize the cost of public service to your families, but you also realize the rewards. So, they instilled that sense of public service and duty, because I was able to see what they were able to do in the community, and while pursuing my private sector careers, realize that if you want to give back and you want to see change and you want to see your community improve, sometimes you have to be part of that change. And that was my journey into eventually volunteer civic engagement as a chair of a community board, then eventually running for office to serve my community as an assembly member, and understanding that the legislative body gave me an opportunity to advocate for the things that our community needed and be a voice and a solution finder for how government could solve some of the problems of the needs of my residents in East Harlem that were significantly underserved and under-resourced. And then thank you to Governor Hochul for giving me the opportunity to serve as Secretary of State and being able to bring that vision and lens statewide at how do we bring those transformational changes to communities all across the state, and doing that from Secretary of State's perch, where they focus on the provision of almost 40 different professions that are really the entryway towards economic opportunity for all New Yorkers, and also have significant range in terms of community investment and the protection of lands and water bodies across the state. So the Secretary of State role is important for many different reasons, both seen and unseen, in terms of serving the community to where I am now, which is really the connection of both public sector and private sector experience. During that, my public sector service, I also was a municipal financial advisor and did a stint at Bloomberg, the company. So really bringing together those two worlds of how does finance and public service come together in a meaningful way to transform communities. That has been the common thread in terms of my service and certainly in my time here at DASNY.
What brought you to service, Commissioner?
So I will say, growing up, we have some similarities. I'm first generation Puerto Rican, born in the Bronx, and both my parents were in education. They were administrators, and education was always emphasized as, a critical vehicle for mobility and for ensuring success and making sure that we were going to do better than the next generation, which I think a lot of us share that storyline. But my parents worked in public schools, and while their names were not on the letterheads of those institutions and schools where they served, I saw day to day the profound impact that they were having on the students that they worked with. And so I spent many days in my mom's office. She worked in the Bronx, and she was the head of the bilingual education program, which means that her office was really a haven for a lot of the kids that were coming into the Bronx during that period, who were immigrants and who were struggling with education and English, and making sure that they had an opportunity to succeed and take advantage of all the opportunities in New York. And I was always struck by this adoration they had for my mom, and how much she meant to them and how she looked after these kids as if they were part of her own family. And that really stuck with me. And I will say that I think that was really the beginning seeds of seeing the value of public service and seeing that investment and that reward and the gratification they both had as educators in the Bronx. And so I think it was just a very natural path for me. I joke around because my father said, you'll either be a doctor or a lawyer. And we quickly realized at 7th grade biology class that I could not dissect a pig. So medical school was definitely an out. And so very early on, really taking on leadership roles. I think about 8th grade student council president, right? And it sort of figure it starts there. So that's been sort of the trajectory, but I really do have to credit, I think, the work of my parents who came here at a very young age, first in their families to graduate from college and postgraduate educations, making sure that I'm honoring that legacy of success. And I'll share a very short story. I was at Somos, which is a legislative conference last year in Puerto Rico, and I was having dinner with a couple of our cabinet colleagues, and they introduced me to this woman. And somehow we started talking. She mentioned that she was from the Bronx, and I told her I was born and raised there. And she said that she went to Roosevelt High School. And I said, well, that's where my mom worked. And she said, who's your mom? I said, Carmen Miranda. And she displayed the biggest smile, still gives me chills. She said, that was my teacher. She says, I loved your mom. Mrs. Miranda, that's what she called her. And then she started calling over some of her friends and said, her mom was my teacher. Her mom was the one that made sure that I went to school. Her mom was the one who helped me make sure that I was going to get into college and told me that I can do it. And this woman is now a very successful administrator in her own field. And so that immense pride, I hope that one day my daughter is sitting somewhere and someone can actually say that I touched her life. And I think that would probably be the biggest testament to public service.
So my beginnings, I think, in public service were examples, from my family. I am 3rd generation out of slavery. And my mother grew up in the Deep South and in Alabama, in Wetumpka, Alabama. That's Deep South, right? And her origin story to me is a family trajectory. Her mother, my grandmother, was off to work one day, and at the age of 10, my mother did what kids do, and saying goodbye to her mother and watching the car go off of the road over a cliff, and so they were in an accident. And being the Jim Crow South, they at a white hospital to try to get some compassion, which they did not find. And so on the road to the Black hospital, my grandmother passed. Her mother died at 10. And 8 years later, my mother was committed to going into healthcare. She wanted to go into the system that was not so fair. And she wanted to be the change. She wanted to do something about it. And so she had a one-way ticket to to New York City from Alabama at 18, and she found that job. And for 43 years, she served in the healthcare industry. And that example, that story, I think has fueled me and my sister, I have an older sister, fueled our desire to be the change, to be involved, to help. My sister also started in public service. She worked for an elected official. And like you, Robert, I was like, I'm never doing that. I'm never going to do that. I don't make any money. You know, I was like, but here I am, here I am 24 years later in public service. And I enjoy every minute of it because it is important and it does help people. And mom, rubbed off on me as moms do, and I'm very happy for it.
Thank you all for sharing those really personal stories. Now, zooming back, and patronage was the name of the game from the Revolution through the Civil War. And it wasn't until 1881, when in the third month of his presidency, President Garfield, who parenthetically came into public service in part because he had come from Ohio to Buffalo to work on the Erie Canal, President Garfield was assassinated by a campaign supporter who thought that he was owed a government job by dint of the fact that he had helped on the campaign. And it was really in response to that assassination that the tide of political and public opinion turned so far against patronage that it led to the Pendleton Act in 1881, and to New York becoming the first state to take it on, modifying the state constitution and enacting the first civil service law at the state level in the country in 1883. So this set the national standard for robust protections and ethical governance, for merit-based service, and all four of us are lifelong New Yorkers. So each of you, just briefly, what do you think are the uniquely New York characteristics that contributed to New York being the one to lead the way on this?
I'll start it off. I think the key thing is New Yorkers don't give up. We are persistent when we want to see change. And I think, one of the things that I have seen throughout government is sometimes change happens incrementally, but then you build momentum year after year after year to see the tremendous change. And I think when we talk about the movement that happened after Tammany Hall, it began with Samuel Tilden against the Tweed Ring, and then it began with Teddy Roosevelt, in terms of the passage of the Pendleton Act. And then we continue to Fiorello LaGuardia a little bit later.
Just name dropping all the greats.
We talk about the history, and we got a lot of places named after them, but sometimes we don't remember that these are moments in time. And there was not it was 2 years, sometimes 10 years, sometimes 20 years to really change that system, to frankly be more inclusive of the individuals who were coming in, and to be more fair, right? And I think one of the common threads that you'll hear about probably in our conversations around civil service is professionalism, bringing a sense of professionalism, merit-based acceptance and promotion, being able to get that opportunity, and not being excluded just because of political party. All of those things did not happen overnight. They happened legislatively, and they happened with leaders being reformers and continuing to kind of plug away at the change that they wanted to see happen and materialize until it finally does.
So I think, when we're talking about reform, and you mentioned a lot of good points, I just want to add to, I think, the different movements that we've seen here in New York State, right? We've spoken about the civil rights movement. We're talking about suffrages and voting rights for women. We're talking about Stonewall and LGBTQ rights. And so there's a very rich legacy here in ensuring that government works for all. And I think one of, our core mandates at the Division of Human Rights is ensuring that we're looking at everything through a neutral lens. So irrespective of who the complainant is, irrespective of who the respondent is, making sure that there is objectivity and neutrality in our decision making. That's really important because government is here to serve for all, right? And when we're talking about the history and the changes in the reform, that really was the movement to making sure that everyone had equal access and opportunity to government.
Just additionally, I mean, everything that was said, but also with the with the workers' movement and the labor movements, these are all movements, in New York State, and they were informed by immigrants. They were informed by people who had different perspectives and different experiences. And what better way to something more robust than to involve more perspectives and more hands in the pot.
So I'm lucky to be joined here today in person and remotely by so many of my outstanding colleagues, about whose politics I know nothing, as I shouldn't. And I imagine the same is true for all of you. New York's original civil service law was championed, as you said, by then Assemblyman Theodore Roosevelt. It was signed into law by then Governor Grover Cleveland, and it created the Civil Service Commission, which at the time consisted of 3 commissioners, 2 from the party, the majority party, and 1 from the other party. Why is the history of bipartisanism important to New York's legacy of civil service?
I think that's what we're talking about, right? When we're talking about equal access and making sure that that bipartisanship really supports the idea of serving all. And I think, we see that across the state. And certainly, I will say, at the division, while our values are very core and they're very integral to our progressive background here in New York, it's important to make sure that everyone understands that the laws that exist here in New York State, especially as it relates to human rights laws, they apply to every single person. I often say to people, if you're a New Yorker, you're covered under human rights law. There are 19 protected classes, and I can assure you that we all fit into multiple categories of those laws. And so I think when we're talking about that bipartisanship, I think that's what we're talking about, right? Making sure that everyone has those equal protections that are critical to enjoying life here in New York.
Balance. Bipartisanship is extremely important. Again, you need the everyone's experience and everyone's background, and to create a balanced system. In workers' comp, our job, we have to be balanced. We have, the dichotomy of opinions, but we have to be balanced. We have the workers and we have the employers that have different ideas. And I think that concept is the same across the state with all the agencies. But it's our job as public servants to look past that and to say, okay, I see all of your interests, but this is what, serves the most people, or this is what serves everyone fairly and as thoroughly as possible. As times change, those things change, but that's our job here on this earth. As generations go through, we have to keep up with the times.
So in the 140 some odd years since the law changed in New York and since the movement to reform away from the patronage system, of course, there have been different iterations of the civil service law, and you all work in various ways with the modern iteration of the civil service. Can you talk a bit about what that work looks like and how the kind of philosophy you've just described manifests itself today?
Sure. Having been in both areas in authority and agency land, you realize the importance of civil service and really access to the system. And almost historically, that has what it has been about. But in actual practice, it changes over time. It's always been about creating a meritocracy, always about creating an opportunity for people, for government to reflect the workforce that it serves. And I have to give a shout out to Commissioner Tim Hogues, who is a Buffalonian and leads those efforts for us, and has really worked to modernize. And I think what you've seen over time is different immigrant groups have certainly fought for access, right? Whether we were talking about the movement from Tammany, and whether you're talking about the wave of immigration from Irish, Jewish, Italian, to later Puerto Rican, and African American. It has always been about creating this opportunity for inclusion through civil service. And I think that has been a common thread throughout the decades, where each new arriving group, struggles and for representation in and through the system. And I think to where we are today, and competing interests around government and public service, there's been a lot of effort, and thanks to the governor for realizing we have to get people back into the civil service system and serving the public, which is why this event is so important, to remind people about the importance of public service, why government can work for you, why you should consider serving your community through government service, and how to be able to realize that. And I think for us, we had seen over the last 1 or 2 decades the decline in terms of the state workforce, and have figured out ways to modernize the current civil service system to be inclusive, to give people an opportunity through our New York Helps program to join the system and then take the test and make sure that you meet all the requirements of that. But we recognize that there's there were some barriers to the system to doing that. So we are all beneficiaries of this ongoing transformation and commitment to civil service and professionalism and equity and inclusive labor, and keeping that legacy moving forward. So I think, having seen that, it's very, important that we continue to recognize those previous contributions as we move into the future.
Chair Foster, your career has touched basically every dimension of public life, from education, elections, to workforce protection, and community development. Across those experiences, is there something consistent that you would say about public service?
I think the consistency is really just the desire, right? It's finding the need, and I call it stepping in the gap, right? It's like you find a need, that there's something that is unfinished or doesn't exist, or something you just want to continue to make better. And my experience, you remind me, as kids started in education and went to public service, went to private, and then came back to public service, and then all of the volunteer stuff in between. And all of those things, I optioned to do them because they meant something, like it was something that I wanted to personally be a part of, right? Education was a big deal in my family, had to do it. And I wanted to have that message resound, wherever I was. And so my work with CUNY, my work with some of the organizations, community-based organizations that fill that need. My work in the private sector actually had to do with public service. It was, as you mentioned, the helping the Help America Vote Act, and that was a big deal back then. It was the hanging chads. Everybody remember the hanging chads? Like it was a big deal, and we were ordered as a nation to go to electronic voting, and that was so fascinating to me. And that was my dream job, actually, because it was in a PR firm and it was dealing with voting, which was a big deal to me as well. And so I just think it's about filling that need, finding that thing or those things that you want to be a part of, that you want to put your hands on, and maybe even have a legacy in, and doing it.
So not every state employee is a civil servant in the sense of having gone through the civil service test, et cetera. But the principles are the same, that the state should hire people based on their merit rather than based on political favoritism. Now, in the early days of the state, sort of notwithstanding movement towards merit, state employment was not an inclusive undertaking, to say the least. So would one or more of you speak about, given the country's and the state's legacy of discrimination, exclusion, racism, how do you work now to run a mission-driven workforce that reflects the state, especially given the challenges around balancing civil service and the other constraints and opportunities related to the way you hire?
So you're talking about the mission of the Division of Human Rights.
I believe so.
I think that's for me. So the Division of Human Rights, as I mentioned, we're talking about the Anti-Discrimination Agency, Enforcement Agency, and the largest number of cases we receive are in the context of employment. We, as I mentioned before, have 19 protected classes. So making sure that we are not only holding others accountable, but we also hold our sister agencies accountable to ensure that the workplace is equitable and that there is diversity and that the people who are serving New Yorkers look like New Yorkers. That's one of our core values. Very happy, after we were very fortunate to receive an incredible investment from Governor Holko of $11 million. We were really able to build out a lot of the resources within our agency. And there was one void that was really noteworthy, is that we didn't have a DEIA office. And I think the concept there was that we were doing this work, we didn't really need a DEIA office. And I beg to differ, because I know that the world is changing and we're all evolving, and we need to make sure, as stewards of the human rights law, right, that we are competent and that we have the cultural awareness to make sure that we're engaging with other communities. And so I'm very proud of that investment that we were able to make as a result of the governor's investment at the agency. But I think when you're talking about equity and you're talking about service in the context of state service, it is really important for the state service and the workforce to reflect the people that we're serving. And diversity is part of that, and ensuring that all voices are being heard and all of those perspectives are at the table. And when they're not, also knowing who you can call, right? And the Division of Human Rights is there to make sure that if you believe you've encountered discrimination in the context of your employment, that we are here as a resource to look into that, investigate it, and make some determinations on your behalf.
There's how you build a mission-driven workforce that reflects the state.
I think it's important as leaders that you recognize your workforce and, more importantly, who's providing services for you. I think, speaking about an organization and authority that, one, relies on professionals, relies on a diverse group of professionals, not that have to operate and reflect every marketplace across the state. We are building and constructing all across the state of New York. So it's important that we work with the local businesses and minority-owned businesses that are all across the state to make sure that there's inclusion. When we talk about our portfolio, we cannot build $13 billion worth of construction across the state without partners, without construction firms, without a diverse group of businesses to help us achieve that goal. So it's really important that we have those resources, and then looking within that our organizations reflect the communities that we serve, and are able to do the work in the communities where we are building. And that doesn't happen if we only hire from one community, or if we only hire from one ethnicity, one gender, one frame of thought. All of those things are reflective of all of the communities that we have. So we need to really think about how we diversify our workforce to do that, and think forward. What is our communities going to look like in the future? Demographically, who are and what are those organizations and businesses that are going to fuel our growth and do our work for the next 10 or 20 years. So the investments that we make here now in diversity are not just, for meeting today's need, is about meeting tomorrow's need. So being able to instill that in your organization, in your hiring practice, and aligning that with the mission that we all do our work so that we can do good for our communities, is the way that we really shift the thinking and create the changes that we want in government, over the longer term.
Not just in terms of our own staffs, but I saw it in action today visiting a DASNY site where they're frenziedly trying to ready the dorms at UBuff for the fall. And there was a service disabled veteran who is hired as an electrician, who was talking about how important it is for his business and the growth of his business to be able to work on a project of the magnitude of those dorms. So it's true in terms of investments even beyond the state workforce, right?
And it's about creating the opportunity. We have qualified minority firms, we have qualified service disabled veteran firms, but they may not get the opportunity unless we create that goal or incentive. So I think part of that, integrating those policy initiatives in terms of the way that we do business to make sure that we are creating an opportunity and access for everyone, is really to the benefit of our clients, which is all of you, the state and the facilities that we build, but also the economy for our local economies, because that business is right here in Buffalo. That business is hiring other people in the community. So we very much see a multiplier effect in terms of some of those investments, requirements, and goals that we include in this. And what's exciting is that we can do that on scale. I think through our portfolio, we are very proud of our participation in terms of minority, women-owned businesses and service-disabled businesses. We achieve typically 35% of our spend goes towards those businesses. So we are very proud of that objective, and the governor has, made it clear that still remains a priority. Why? Because it's good for New York and it reflects the people of New York. So we continue that mission and continue to build on that success.
Chair Foster, beyond government service, there are public servants who are working quietly behind the scenes, and this is sort of right up your alley, as they were saying. So why is investing in the public workforce so essential to ensuring the government delivers on its promises from a workforce standpoint?
Well, you have to, invest in the workforce in order for thing, to get done, right? And people often underestimate what that means. And having a clear understanding of, for example, workers' comp, having a clear understanding that, okay, what does ensuring proper delivery of benefits really means? It's not just sitting there saying, check number this and check number that. It's a whole court system, so to speak. That's kind of how we describe ourselves. It's a whole court system. So understanding the gravity of, the undertaking is the main thing, I think. And then you can you have your good public servants who are able to lay out the details for you and all those things. But it has to be a mission, and you have to create space to make sure that, you are as committed to the work as possible, being the leader, so that you can infect other people with that same commitment.
And of course, when you find the outlier public servant who isn't, to report it to the Inspector General's office at 1-800-DO-RIGHT. So these big picture ideas are all well and good and great reasons to come into public service, but everyone really does it for the people. Can each of you share a story about either service delivery or a case that you have handled in your current role that exemplifies the import of service to actual human beings who live and work in New York?
Sure, so I'm very happy to share that I have lots of great stories, given the work that we do. But I think there's one I think that really stands out because of where we are historically and the backdrop of what's happening with the federal government. We recently settled a case where a landlord building manager posted a sign sort of in the area where the recycling signs go in the foyer, right, of an apartment building, replaced that sign with a sign that said, if you believe your neighbor is an immigrant, call ICE, and listed the phone number. And when you think about coming home, possibly being a member of the immigrant community or being typecast as a member of an immigrant community, because whatever that means, and seeing that in the foyer of your home, where the building administrators are asking people to call ICE and bring them into your building. To me, it was it was abhorrent behavior, but it was also illegal, and we were able to hold those bad actors accountable with fines and penalties and, of course, changes in policies. But that really struck me because it really speaks to where we are right now in the country, as well as in the state of New York. And as proud as I am of the very progressive values that we have here in New York, we know that we have challenges here in New York as well. And I think, it's really important for us when we think about what that means is to remember our own history of immigration here to this country, right? And the people who have now gotten to the point where they are celebrated communities, not that long ago were outsiders and considered outsiders and treated as outsiders. And we're seeing some of that narrative really repeat in a way that is unfortunate, and I think flies in the face of the values of certainly New York and certainly our governor. So that case really, it struck me, and I really thought about the families who are living there and what it must be like to come home and feel unsafe in your home, right? After you're working and you're paying your rent and your kids are going to school, and explaining to them what that means and who are those neighbors who perhaps might be calling immigration or ICE. And do you open the door? Will mom or dad come home tomorrow? That's the fear that is existing in our community right now. The Division of Human Rights, as I mentioned, discrimination, anti-discrimination laws, we protect national origin and citizenship. So whether it's in the context of employment or in housing or in education or public accommodation, public spaces, you are protected here in New York. And New York is a welcoming city for all of the New Yorkers who decide to come and make this place your home. So that's a case that really has struck me as a sign of our times, but also a sign of the recourse that's available and the laws that continue to protect those communities.
Great. I appreciate that because we're the organization that's supposed to finance and build things. And on the finance side, sometimes the numbers are really large and it's hard to figure out what that means. Oh, great. DASNY sold bonds for a variety of different people to the tune of $10 billion. Okay, that's a big number. What does that mean in your communities? And we are just so proud of sometimes the smaller projects as well as some of the big ones. So I'll just name a few because you'll be able to track them over time. One of our largest projects, which is happening in the Capital Region District, $1.7 billion, is to build our equivalent of the CDC for Albany. So these are the area where they study all the infectious diseases, where they try to keep us safe, where they do research to try and make sure that either animal diseases or people diseases don't infect us all and wipe us out, right? So that's a big deal. And it's going to be really great to see that happen when it's done in the next few years. But my job is also to make sure we deliver it on time and on budget. Right. So that's an example of a big project. A medium-sized project would be, like you mentioned, IG, about FIT, which is downstate. It's the Fashion Institute of Technology. We built them a new building. It took them a little while to get all the money together, but we have now created a world-class institution to keep our leadership in terms of fashion, creativity, and design right here in New York State. So a huge economic project, a beautiful building. Please go visit it if you're in New York City. And then kind of our smaller projects, but the ones that are no less important that people see in their communities all the time. And I have to again shout out the governor for this unplugged and play idea, which is basically saying, I want to invest in communities so that our kids get back outside, get off their phones, and that our communities can come together again and do that with a state initiative. So it's not out of your local tax dollars, and sometimes we know how stretched those are. But that means new swimming pools in many communities, including some right here in Western New York. That means new community centers and senior centers through our BRICS initiative, and new playgrounds that are going to happen all across the state of New York. So I was in Millerton, last week, and 2 weeks ago in Troy, and, certainly probably coming back here next week. I think we were going to do one for Western New York. But to see that those are small investments, maybe $5 million or $6 million to build a brand new pool where it didn't exist or a community didn't have access and kids couldn't swim and seniors don't have air conditioning in their senior centers, and haven't had a new roof in their facility for a long time. Those are the little projects that mean a lot to all the little communities that we serve. And it's through that work and, formerly as, Secretary of State, through our New York Forward and Downtown Revitalization initiatives, that we are investing in communities for the next generation all across New York State. And so there are many examples, but I really hope people will understand that it's happening in your communities right now. I promise you.
Yeah, well, my agency is a little bit different. So within the workers' compensation area, so I was a board member for 16 years. And thank you to Governor Hochul for making me chair. Actually, this week will be my first year being chair. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. So as a board member, our responsibility is to read appealed cases and to come to unanimous decisions. And oftentimes, it's not one case. I can tell it's a few cases that often have to do with what we call labor market attachment, right? But basically, it's like if you get injured on the job, then, if you're too injured to return to your job, you have to look for a new job. That's labor market attachment. But sometimes the people that the law requires for us to look for jobs can't really look for jobs, or sometimes might not be a thing. So a lot of these cases, particularly when I see the age of, say, 70 or 75 even, when they are required, because it is the law, when they are required to look for work, it created such a conflict with me, like such a conflict. And so, we talked about it, and, have started to really open up that discussion so that hopefully there can be, something other than sending someone, of such advanced age or other people of such, terrible there were some terrible workplace accidents, y'all. Just, people go through some stuff, and sometimes returning to work may not be the best thing, but our laws. And so that's all about the evolution, right? It's like our laws, that we don't have the same workplaces as we did in the past. So sometimes we have to revisit, the things that may not make sense anymore. And so that's what gives me pride, is to be able to, have a discussion with someone and say, hey, let's look at this because this seems outdated or it seems unfair. So that's a little bit different. I don't have money to give.
I don't have
It's
money
like,
to give.
right. It's like, so.
Well, I think that workers' compensation is a great example of how policy and change and reform can come from tragedy, in the same way that the Pendleton Act came after President Garfield's assassination. Many folks will know that the workers' compensation system, which New York State pioneered, came in the wake of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, in which dozens and dozens of workers, primarily immigrants, primarily preteen and teenage girls, were
146 people.
because of unsafe workplace conditions in a factory. And that gave rise to the state's leadership around those issues and ultimately the birth of the organization that you now lead. I wanted to draw a little bit on the thread of something Commissioner Miranda said, and you talked a bit, President Rodriguez, about your own immigrant story and legacy. And how do you think the tradition of New York State as a hub of American immigration impacts how we think about service here as compared to maybe in other parts of the country?
I think when we think about service, and you spoke about this, the different waves of immigration, right? The 1800s to the 1920s, the Irish and Germans, Southern Eastern European, and that was followed with the Great Migration from the South, and also included Puerto Rico. You're really talking about a city, the city that we see today, and the city that we all enjoy in all of its different forms, was created with the contributions of many, many immigrants, right? And so keep that in mind as we continue to frame conversations about those immigrant communities and our neighbors who are here in New York. Because what we must recall and we must remember all the time is that we would not be where we are without those immigrant contributions. That's just the truth of the matter. And the skills that they bring and the culture that they bring, that's what makes New York a place where everyone wants to come, right? People want to come here. We are a worldwide destination. And part of that is the rich diversity that exists here that goes beyond arts, that goes beyond food, even though I'm a foodie and I love all sorts of food, that really talks about the structure that is New York and all of the best parts of New York. Those are the communities that actually contributed to making that a reality for us to enjoy today. So when we're talking about immigration and we're talking about a very important national topic, we do have to remember that where we are today is a function of all those communities that we welcomed yesterday.
Other thoughts?
Oh, sure. I think it's important to recognize, just to take another thread, is that our economic success is completely reliant on immigration. I think the numbers in terms of, United States demographics, we are an aging, country, and certainly not keeping
Speak
up.
for yourself, sir.
Protect aging is a
For
protected
aging
class in New York State. I'll throw that in there.
To the 250th birthday, I think we're going to keep going and keep aging, and we need we need people to be able to build the things that we build, to provide the services that will keep us all there, to provide food for our farmers and dairy farmers in the north, in the north and central parts of the state. Workers of all kinds and of all descents are necessary in order for us to be successful. We are, in addition to the high-tech jobs we want to have that come out of Micron in Central New York, we also need people to do all the service jobs and the labor jobs that are happening here. So I think, keeping that context in mind, that immigration thread is not a recent thread. It is a thread that literally starts with the beginning of our country. So, it's just making sure that we continue to reinforce those principles, that we have stood for historically and apply them to the way that we work today to the needs of our economy today, to the needs of our city today, and embrace some of those changes in cultures for the way that they continue to be part of our DNA, and continue to transform us. I think that's one of the most important themes that we can have when we talk about how this conversation around public service and the growth and transformation of New York has occurred. It is, very much entwined with the immigration conversations.
And I had a fun fact that I learned last night while preparing for this. So Castle Garden was the nation's first immigration welcome center located in Manhattan right now. So when you think about that legacy of immigration before Ellis Island, there was Castle Garden. And that's really profound when you're thinking about first in the nation, which New York has that distinction in so many different areas. But since I learned that last night, I wanted to make sure I shared it with everyone.
Thank you. We each have our own vantage point on the challenges that we're facing on the national level. We think a lot in my office about the threats to independent oversight and the importance, as you heard, of von Steuben and the history of having nonpartisan folks who can make sure that the rules are being rigorously followed and consistently applied as we seek to do. And we've seen threats to that at the national level. How do you all think about the challenges to your issue areas at the national level, and what are you doing to solve for it at the state and local level, and how do you stay optimistic? Right, the optimism.
I mean, I can jump in from a civil rights perspective. It's extremely concerning to see what's happening in Washington, D.C. Equal rights protections, that conversation regarding diversity, the conversation regarding women's rights and reproductive rights, all of it is extremely alarming. What I do know is that New York is a safe haven. And irrespective, I always say this, irrespective of what's going on in DC and what the president may or may not be doing with a Sharpie pen, our human rights law has not changed, right? And we are incredibly fortunate to have a governor and an attorney general and all the other state leaders making sure that we're holding them accountable, because you can't just do whatever you want here in New York. And the human rights law existed 81 years ago. It has evolved to something that is much broader, right, and much more comprehensive. But the federal government isn't going to take that away, and certainly not in the swipe of a pen. And so that's, I think, what really drives the work that we're doing, is that we're seeing people come to us because they know they can no longer have recourse with the federal government. They understand that housing laws and fair housing laws are not being enforced, right? So discrimination is okay. Language discrimination is okay. Being passed up for opportunities at work based on your race or your religion or your creed or your sexual orientation, not okay. But the federal government is sending a very different signal. So state rights right now are really critical because they are the guardrails that are existing. And again, New York continues to lead in this space. We started 81 years ago, really just talking about employment and for protected classes, groups with race, color, creed, and national origin. And we're now talking about jurisdiction, as I mentioned before, in housing, in education, in employment, in public accommodation, in all of those spaces that you continue to build for us, and 19 different protected classes. And so think about that evolution and why that's so important, especially now today.
I think for us, we think about it from the building perspective, and really when you're dealing with such important fiscal responsibilities around making sure that there's fairness, equity, transparency. Most importantly, not corruption. Right? I mean, I think the important conversation is when you're dealing with that is public trust is built on making sure that we're able to build something, that we do that with a high level of integrity to make sure that we are trying to follow laws that have been created around procurement, and making sure that we take the right number of bids, and that that we actually go with the best particular price and builder, and that we're following those rules that make procurement fair, that make sure that we can build things that we're inclusive and meeting all the objectives, so that people can trust that what we're building is being procured and our dollars are being spent appropriately, and that we're building it to the code and the requirements so that they are safe, and that they provide the highest level of quality, and that that we're paying people fair wages on the jobs, that we're paying prevailing wages on the job as the law requires. So all of those things come into play to making sure that we are doing things in the way that has been prescribed by the law and the voters, and really meeting those needs. And I think when you see that that doesn't happen, when you see that, systemically those rules are not being applied in the same way to the same projects, by different levels of government, it forces us to question, folks who are doing it the right way and trying to maintain those principles. So that's very much, I'm grateful for the 500 plus people at DASNY that work to deliver these projects, with a high level of integrity and deliver those projects, on time and on budget, and really strive to do that every day. And also realize that, when we talk about infrastructure, we are more than 250 years old when we talk about both the city of New York in particular, and the things that we have built need to be rebuilt and continue to be built. And the gamesmanship that happens in terms of some of our major infrastructure initiatives, whether we're talking about Gateway, Second Avenue Subway, mass transit, road funding, renewables, all of these things have shifted the course and direction of our infrastructure investment in New York. And the governor's been, a fighter in terms of making sure that we don't get the short end of the stick and we're able to invest in ways that are necessary. Hence many, many lawsuits where we're able to say, hey, New Yorkers need this, and move ahead with that. So I think that's some of the challenges that we see with the federal government at this time.
There are challenges, but I think that for me, the importance is to be the example. It's like we lead the agency, and representation matters. And as whatever's happening, on the federal level, we too, have to abide by the laws, and that in many ways saves us, right? Because this is the law, and we can't change the law, like you said, with a pen, with swipe of a pen, or pronouncing on high that there's a new rule. We have to very much abide by the law. So that kind of saves us. It's like we know that the law is going to be the shield in workers' compensation, but also creating the space for people to have conversations too, because you're at work for more than half of your life in some instances, and so you don't want to just be there in a vacuum or in a silo, right? So we create spaces where there can be some compelling conversations and things that then helps people to kind of process what's happening outside of work, because that very much affects what happens inside of work. And to that end, the representation of making sure that, as leaders, we are, staying true to the mission of the agency or the mission of humanity in some instances. And Governor Hochul, she has the charge, she leads the charge for us to do just that in so many ways. And so having the example to follow, and then being the example to sustain within our agencies, I think is very important. It's a starting point, I think, before we do all the nuts and bolts of things.
As we conclude, I want to ask you each to briefly address to the interns, students, future public servants who are watching and listening. How do you see the historical values from New York's early Constitution through our first civil service reform and beyond? How do you see those values, including the ongoing commitment to merit and integrity, shaping the challenges and opportunities ahead for civic trust? And what would you say to them about what we hope for them and our future?
I think it's important for the future public servants to hear this discussion, to understand where New York has came from a very difficult time, very, very difficult issues that we worked through. And we work through them and we continue to work through them. And sometimes we stumble and fall and we continue to work through them anyway. And I want them to take that as an example that it's not easy, but also want them to know what it is. And what it is fighting for you. It's fighting for you. It's fighting for your families. It's trying to make things better in this world. And if we're not going to be the ones that do that, the world is not going to get better. So we can have these desires, to be millionaires and trillionaires in AI space or in technology or whatever it is that makes all this money. But it's the nuts and bolts work of public service that will continue to lead us to the next 250 years and will serve as the beacon message that what America is service, and it starts with it.
So I think opportunity is something that's really important. I want people to take away. 250 years ago, none of us would be at this table, right? And so here we are today. And you think about the evolution of who's at the table now and who has been given access and who has a voice at that table. That is extremely important. And so for those of you who perhaps see this as unattainable, I think what we're all here to say is that it is very much attainable, very much within the reaches of everybody. And so as someone who comes from, very humble beginnings, my grandparents worked in factories. I didn't know that I would ever be on this stage sharing this opportunity with an esteemed group of my colleagues. And so interns, don't block your blessings and see yourself here in these spaces because they were meant for you and we're here to make sure that you have access to them. And we are eagerly awaiting the moments, right, when we can pass the baton to that next generation of servants.
I would add, be inspired. Be inspired about the opportunity to serve. And to just build upon that point, government or public service can take on many forms, right? We obviously are great proponents of government service, and that can be either through employment or through elected positions. But that's not the only way to serve. And for the next generation, it's reminding them that you can serve through education. You can serve through healthcare. You can serve through nonprofit leadership. You can serve through your church. Find a way to serve, and recognize that service is so rewarding, and that there are ways that you can serve the public or the community and serve your family at the same time, and be able to do that. So we are examples. We are serving in very different ways, as you can gather, right? In different careers, in different industries. And I like to say, certainly in government service, I have a job for everybody and anybody. There is no one government job. There are many, many different government jobs across many agencies and different ways to serve. So I would say, consider that. Whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a finance professional, whether you're a laborer, whether you're a technology person, there is something for you in service, and certainly service in your community at all levels of government, right? So please, that is the only way that we continue to take the country forward. And if there's anything else, is that it takes persistence. Government change and government service, only happens through dedication and through persistence. And we're only able to change the way people think about their communities and through the government, through that work and through that effort, which is truly rewarding and amazing when you give it the opportunity.
Well, before we conclude with an offering, I want to say some particular thanks first to the remarkable Buffalo History Museum, and thank you, Melissa Brown, for having us, to these outstanding panelists for sharing their expertise, to my remarkable team, Jack Wild, Jamie Moat, Jeff Hagan, Jeff Haber, Aaron Meaguy, Ryan Hayward, Anthony M. Provenzano Jr., Chuck Dittmer, our intern, Alana Droff, who helped with the questions, and so many others around the state who helped support bringing folks together to have this conversation. Thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over to Mo Simbundu, the International Trade Manager for Western New York from Empire State Development and Director of Community Relations for the Western region, for the governor to introduce our closing act. Please join me in thanking our speakers, and thank you all for being with us.
Good afternoon. Let's give our panel members another round of applause. This was incredible in so many ways. Now, when we talk about public service, I think about all the students that come to Western New York. And when Commissioner Miranda talked about attainable, I thought about Sophanie Pierre Michel, who came to school here at Buffalo, SUNY Buffalo, graduated and ended up working in the governor's office and now is at workers' comp. That's what we talk about when we say public service, and that's what it's my honor to be here on behalf of the governor. I serve as the governor's director of community relations, overseeing the operations in Western New York. When Jack called and said, we want to come up to Buffalo, I said, oh, we will make that happen. We always love having commissioners and members of the governor's cabinet come up here. And I just want you to know, despite what you see on TV, it's always this hot in Buffalo. I just want to thank our panelists again, our extraordinary Inspector General, who I've known for a long time, who has traveled all across the state, is doing extraordinary work on behalf of all New Yorkers. Thank you for the work that you are doing for all of us. To my friend, Robert Rodriguez, I'm starting to feel like you may have an apartment in Buffalo that I don't know about because you're here so much. We really appreciate having you. And to Commissioner Miranda, thank you for being a dynamic leader and for being a representation of our state and constantly pushing information out to make sure that people know their rights all across the state. And to Chair Forster, thank you for being a champion for people. Sometimes all people need is just someone fighting for them to make sure that the laws that we had years ago that are very different today are protecting people today. Melissa, thank you for always willing to host us. We've held so many events here with the governor over the years. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And oh, there you go. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. No, that's wonderful. That's always the reason why we make state investment. We want to make sure that the public has access to spaces like this. Because again, especially right now, we're always looking for more venues, more spaces for people to be able to come and celebrate our nation's 250th anniversary. And I was sitting there thinking about something that Abraham Lincoln said, which was government of the people, by the people, for the people. And that's what this is all about. This is our government, despite what is seen at the national level, at New York State. We are in the forefront. We are leaders. We're making sure that the state and city of Buffalo are setting the example of what is possible and what can be done when a state stand up to do the right thing. And Buffalo, talking about 250 years, we have so much history here. And I'm going to talk about some of those just so that you know why Buffalo is so special. Buffalo is known as the City of Light. This is the adopted home of Shirley Chisholm. This is also where windshield wipers were invented. air conditioning, the ball jar, Kissinger furniture, also where Teddy Roosevelt was inaugurated. And soon, one of the most important ones, and I'm always so proud to say this when I travel across the state, soon to be the home of the Western New York Hispanic Heritage Institute right here in Western New York. Kaz, thank you for that work. It's my pleasure to welcome Hadia Alwadi. Now, Jack gave me Hadia's bio, but I know Hadia in this community. Everywhere you go, she's out and about with that smile. She's someone who mixes poetry with advocacy, with marketing strategy to make sure that stories in our region are being told the right way. She's someone who understands that when people come together, beautiful things can happen. She's been able to tell the stories of so many greats in Western New York. And we are so honored to have her here. And she is someone who continues to travel across the country, representing Buffalo and also Rochester. Hi, dear.
So I really enjoy serving my community through my voice and storytelling, but also teaching people how to fly. Raise your hand if you know how to fly. Anybody? Kind of? You think you can jump? Good enough. You kind of have to jump and take off to know how to fly. Well, I fly through life like I'm chosen because I am. You see, I never lose. I pivot. Always win. I did it. Because I move with the strength and spirit of a champion, and no one can ever bring me down. Because when you look around, I'm always back for another round. I keep my head high. It's never down. Because my crown sits strong. Because I got faith that there are some things you can never take. My spirit you can never shake. My mind, it will never break. My flesh is so blessed. There's ancestral strength in every breath. And yes, I'm stronger than titanium, energy on vibranium, an undefeated force that you feel, that claim that you forgot about, because oftentimes they might mess around, but heck, now they're finding out how I continue to fly higher and higher and higher, just like my good sister Maya. You see, I'll just rise, and I set myself on fire, because I'm never scared. I'm always prepared. You see, I've already stared death in the eye 3 different times and said, today, it's not the day you arrive. My soul's immortal. I will never die. And so, I use my voice as my ministry to spit deisms and soliloquies. And I got y'all snapping your fingers because you're killing me. As we embrace the essence of spoken word poetry, because collectively, that's how we all will get free. Thank you.
Yorkers who suspect fraud and corruption in state government should report it to 1-800-DO-RIGHT. Thank you all for being with us today. Enjoy the summer. Take good care.